Good evening, everyone. We might get underway. I think it's about 6:05. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jo Bragg. I'm the CEO and solicitor at Environmental Defenders Queensland. I'd like to welcome you here tonight, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and the elders past and present. Indigenous people have been taking care of the country for thousands of years, and I think that is particularly significant given the purpose for which we're meeting tonight. First of all, I'd like to make an acknowledgement. We were all very saddened and very shocked by the sudden death of environmental campaigner and friend Felicity Wishart. So, an unexpected passing. Felicity has made a magnificent contribution of leadership to environmental protection over the last 25 to 30 years in relation to land clearing laws, in relation to biodiversity laws. She's mentored women within the environment sector. She's always been ready with helpful advice, a kind word and a great sense of humour. Many of you would know her more recently as a lead campaigner in the fight to protect the Great Barrier Reef. So really just wanted to acknowledge the passing of Felicity and to send our condolences to her family and many friends. Australia, leader or laggard? Unfortunately, you might already know the answer to this question as it relates to climate change. It can be rather depressing when you see inaction by Australian governments on climate change. But in fact, sometimes there are events that inspire optimism and can cause us to pursue protecting the climate for future generations with a bit of a spring to our step. And on June the 24th this year, history was made when a Dutch court ordered the Dutch government to cut its greenhouse gas emissions. This is the first time that we're aware of that a judge has legally required a state to take precaution against climate change. That judge was making history, and we're really excited as lawyers and conservationists to hear that wonderful news. That verdict brought hope and inspiration to communities around the world that are looking to hold their governments accountable on climate change. In Australia, we've run a number of pieces of litigation, particularly in New South Wales, and Sue Higginson, our colleague from EDO New South Wales, is here tonight, but also in Queensland. Most of that litigation has focused on the lawfulness and the impacts of particular projects. Fossil fuel-fired power stations, proposed coal mines. So the Dutch case is a very interesting case and brings us to explore further what types of ways we can do with clients to explore action on climate change. So tonight, the program is essentially two short speeches by Sean Ryan of EDO and Sue Higginson of EDO New South Wales, followed by a longer speech by our special guest, Marianne Menisma from the Netherlands, leader of Agenda, who ran that wonderful case. And then after that has occurred, we'll have a good solid time for questions and answers, 30 minutes, maybe 40. So what I might do now is tell you a little bit about Sean Ryan. For those of you who don't know Sean Ryan, Sean is our principal solicitor at EDO Queensland. He's been the leader of the EDO Queensland cases for clients such as Coast and Country in relation to climate change. Recently, the key case which he has led with a lot of hard work from the other legal and non-legal staff at the office is the Land Service Coast and Country challenge to the proposed Adani Carmichael mine in the Galilee Basin. Sean has qualifications in science and law. He's a very hard worker and he makes a wicked espresso martini. So without further ado, I'll invite Sean to give a short talk about some of the climate litigation happening here in Queensland. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Jo. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. So see if I can get this working. Oh, that's not promising. Oh, that's better. All right, so as Jo said, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the litigation we've been running in Queensland in relation to climate change, and I'll move through it rather fast so we can get to the main act and the main event, which is Marianne. So first, an overview of who we are. So Environmental Defenders Office, we're a non-government organisation. We have been completely community funded, although there's a current promise for the Labor government in Queensland to restore some of our funding, and we're hoping that will come through. We're a community legal centre, and we're part of a national network of Environmental Defenders Office, and as Jo said, we're very happy to have Sue Higgins from our office in New South Wales with us this evening as well. That's most of the people at our staff at our little house in West End. So what we do is we give legal advice and representation. We have a program of legal education so people understand what their legal rights are, and we also work on improving the law based on our knowledge of the work we do with our clients. And it's all for the public interest in the area of environmental law. So most of our history, in fact, we've been going for about 25 years, and most of it's in relation to a lot of animal protection, so protecting flying foxes, koalas, the slightly less lovable lungfish. We had a case. But increasingly, we've been asked to assist clients with issues in relation to coal and coal seam gas. And some commentators seem perplexed about why we'd be concerned about coal and coal seam gas. Can anyone maybe suggest? Right? Yeah, it's climate change. It's not so hard to figure out. But so internationally, we've agreed, most countries have agreed to limit what they call dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, and it has been agreed that that level, that threshold or guardrail we should be seeking to avoid is 2 degrees. Now, I have a slide that I'm not going to go through in any detail because I don't have any time, but I think the important point from this slide is basically we cannot comply with 2 degrees and burn all the proven reserves of coal and fossil fuels. In fact, a recent study said that 95% of the coal in Queensland has to remain in the ground if we're to achieve the ideal of staying below 2 degrees warming. So is Queensland embracing a renewable future and putting coal in the past? No. It's expanding the coal and fossil fuel industry, and one of the biggest areas for expansion is the Galilee Basin. The proposed mines in the Galilee Basin at the moment, if they were to proceed, would expand our coal exports from about 50 million tonnes per annum by a further 220 million tonnes per annum. So that would result in, when that coal is burnt, about 500 million tonnes of carbon dioxide each year, which is more than twice the annual emissions of Netherlands, for example. So you can see why some of our clients are concerned about that. And we've been running a series of cases to try and have those climate change impacts taken into account, because it was certainly a surprise to me when I learnt that of all of those projects, the climate change impacts of large coal projects is not taken into account in the assessment process. And one of our leading legal minds in EDO Queensland, Dr. Chris McGrath, we're having a look at the acts. We say, well, our acts require the environmental impacts of these projects to be taken into account. And if you look at the language of those acts, they require the indirect and cumulative impacts of those projects to be taken into account and the impacts on the environment. So our question is, well, why does that not allow the climate change impacts of these projects to be taken into account? So that one question has really been the driver of a series of litigation that we've been running over the last sort of 10 years. And I'll give you a potted history of it. So the first mine I'm going to talk about is the Newlands mine, which is in central Queensland. This was a case run in 2006. It was a smallish expansion to a mine, 1.9 million tonnes. And Queensland Conservation Council objected in the Land and Resources Tribunal. And the member in that decision heard all the evidence and then went and looked up on Google climate denialist information, and then relied on that in the judgment. So we appealed that to the Court of Appeal, thinking maybe that's not the correct legal process to follow, and the Court of Appeal agreed with us and quashed that decision and ordered it to be remade. Before it could be remade, however, the Queensland Labor government at the time, the Bligh government I believe, passed special legislation to approve that mine, so this issue about climate change impacts didn't get resolved. The next mine was in Wandoan, also central Queensland, and this time again we're acting for Friends of the Earth of Brisbane this time, and we asked the court to consider the climate change impacts of that proposed mine. The court found that the impacts of the mine it considered be limited to just the digging up of the coal within the mine lease area and not the consequences of the burning. We actually lodged an appeal to that decision because we disagreed with that. But before we could take it any further, unfortunately the client ran out of impetus to take the cost risk, because it's very hard to take these actions in higher courts and bear the risk of paying the other side's legal fees. So unfortunately that case was dropped. That mine still hasn't proceeded, I should mention. It was shelved in 2013. That's one of our clients, but I'll skip ahead since I've already got the bell for the 5-minute mark. So the next set of mines that we've been in litigation against is in the Galilee Basin in sort of very central Queensland. So the first of those mines is the Alpha coal mine. Now this is a much larger mine. We call them mega mines. This is 30 million tonnes per annum, so much larger than almost anything we've seen before. We ran a number of issues, including groundwater impacts, on which we were successful. The court ordered for the first time ever, or recommended, I should say, for the first time ever, that a coal mine be refused based on those impacts, or additional conditions be imposed to address those groundwater impacts. However, the court did not accept the climate change arguments. Now, this time we had a client who was willing to go all the way, and that has been appealed, and the appeal hearing was heard in April this year, and we're awaiting a judgment of the Supreme Court on that. So we're hoping finally we'll get some view of a higher court to whether or not climate change impacts from these large projects should be taken into account. And that's the team that went in the Alpha case, so I'll just skip through that. We're also lodging an objection to the Kevin's Corner mine, which is the neighbouring, we'd say, twin mine of the Alpha mine. It's a much smaller objection, and climate change issues aren't being run in that as much as groundwater and economics. That hasn't gone to a hearing yet. That'll be heard in late this year. And the biggest mine, however, of the lot of them is the Carmichael coal mine by Adani Mining Proprietary Limited, and that's proposed to be 60 million tonnes per annum, so twice the size of the preceding mines, and we understand it is the largest proposed coal mine in the world at the moment. There's a couple existing that are larger, but it's the biggest proposal. That was an epic case. We are pretty sure that it's the largest community-led environmental case in Australia's history. It went for 5 weeks. We had 12 witnesses, and we raised not only the climate change impacts, which are clearly of concern, but these large projects have massive impacts on all sorts of Australia's natural wonders and resources, including groundwater. There's a beautiful Dungmabula spring system that exists there that seemed like it would be severely threatened by that mine. That finch that we saw before, the black-throated finch, which is a gorgeous little endangered finch, was a big issue in the case. And there was a slightly less sexy, waxy cabbage palm, which I don't have a photo of. And we also ran economics. For the first time, we ran economics really hard, and we got a lot of cut-through on that. And it was quite clear that the claims that the company was making in the media and publicly, they weren't able to support in court. And the jobs figures and the royalty figures that they were claiming were the benefits of these mines were actually reduced by somewhat, about 80%, when they actually had to swear the truth of it in court. So we're still waiting for a decision on that, hopefully sometime later this year. It might be as late as early next year. But we felt like we ran a really good case there, and we're really hopeful of a positive outcome on those other issues, but also on climate change. So in summary, we've been increasingly asked to address climate change issues in our office, and we've been running a lot of litigation in response to that. The focus has been these major fossil fuel expansions, but we were really excited to hear about the case in the Netherlands and the win there, where they tackled the federal or their national government directly on their emissions policies. So we're very pleased to have Marjan Menezma with us this evening to explain that case to us in more detail, and so we can think more about what other new and innovative actions we can run in relation to climate change. So thanks. I think if I've still got a few seconds, I want to show you my favourite photo of the case. So the black-throated finch is an endangered species, incredibly rare. The company couldn't find many of them when it went on the mine site. And in one day, a PhD researcher went onto the site and saw 400 to 500 of them. It's the largest sighting of black-throated finch ever in the history. And he took this photo. And this is just a fraction of the flock that he saw, but an incredibly endangered bird, yet right on the mine site we have more of the bird than we've seen anywhere. So there's something very special about that site, and reinforces why we need to protect it, not just for the climate, but for future generations. So thanks for taking the time to listen to me. I'll hand you over to my next guest. Oh no, Joe's going to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Our next speaker is Sue Higginson. Sue is Principal Solicitor at Environmental Defenders New South Wales. EDO Queensland and EDO New South Wales work very closely, particularly on matters like climate litigation and mining. So we're really delighted that she's able to be here today. You might have heard of the Bulga case concerning the Warkworth mine. Well, that's one of those major cases that EDO New South Wales has been pursuing with great vigour and success. So I'm now going to attempt to find Sue's presentation. Pardon? Next slide, okay. Wonderful. So please give Sue a very warm Brisbane welcome.
Thank you, Queensland, for having me tonight. It's lovely to be here, and I too pay my respects to the traditional owners. I'm going to talk very briefly because 10 minutes does go very fast. Sean has explained to you what EDO Queensland is as an entity, and EDO New South Wales, well, we're brothers and sisters and brothers. That's what we do. Of recent times, you're probably all aware, our organisations have been targeted in a very significant way by vested interest. Primarily those interests have been really those that are attached to the mining industry, and in particular the coal industry. So I tell you the reason for that is because at the end of the day, we've been incredibly effective in our climate litigation program. EDO New South Wales ran the first climate litigation case in Australia. That was the Redbank Power Station case, a power station that was seeking approval back in 1994. So rest assured, while climate change may be hitting the papers a bit more and our obligations are getting more and more serious and dire, and our need to respond so significantly overdue, there's been a massive section of the legal community and the conservation community, and we've all been working together for many years, achieving some pretty fantastic outcomes. So EDO New South Wales and myself personally, like Joe and Queensland, sheer kind of lawyer ecstasy running around the office when we heard about the Dutch group. It was just so terrific to kind of see this this way of exploring climate litigation opportunities through an incredibly traditional and conservative area of law, the law that we know as civil law of torts. I can't give you the whole kind of Law 101 because A, you'd fall asleep, and B, it would take us several years because that's what it does. So I'm just going to just quickly, EDO New South Wales, we've been around since 30 years. We're the first established EDO Our first ever principal solicitor is the current Chief Judge of the Land and Environment Court in New South Wales. We've done, obviously climate has been a very big part of our litigation program for the last 10 years. But we've also, it's really important that we keep the focus on all of our environmental litigation. We managed to get an injunction to stop whaling in the Australian waters in the Antarctic region. Obviously, that hasn't necessarily been followed, and we've got more exciting things to announce in the coming months about that. So we undertake litigation in all fields, but climate litigation is what's brought you here. I just want to tell you one happy story for us, and that is we took on Rio Tinto in New South Wales. We had this terrific group of people. This is the core of them here. They started off receiving a notice that Rio Tinto was going to expand its coal mine operations. Rio Tinto's already completely absorbed the small village of Warkworth Thorley, that once existed in a location. It's now gone. It used to be a little community, a little town, had a little hall, and it's now at the centre of that town is now a massive open-cut coal mine. And so the community there received a notice: we're going to expand this massive mine, and we're going to eat into some of those biodiversity offset areas that the mine had promised some years earlier to protect forever. Forever, according to a coal mine, is a very different story to what you and I might think when we're looking at conservation forever. So this mine was pretty significant. It's already enormous. It was intended to expand it for another, going over for another 20 years and taking a heck of a lot more coal out of the ground, all thermal coal, so ultimately all contributing to the serious impacts, dangerous impacts of climate change. It was very difficult in this case we managed to challenge this mine. We had what's called merit appeal rights, a little bit like the case that Sean was speaking about with the Adani mine here. Where we can bring science into it. We can talk about the economics. This was the first time ever in Australia that an environmental case had economic evidence. We said, okay, it's time to bring in the economics of mining. It's time to bring in the economics of coal. Particularly now, coal really is no longer king on the economic scene. And similar to what happened here in Queensland, it just became really clear that this spiel that Rio Tinto had delivered to the community, and most importantly the government and the administrators that were going to approve the mine, was, hey, we seriously need this money. Our economy is going to be absolutely broke without it. There was no requirement to look at the alternative of not doing this mine. There was no requirement to look at the economics of renewables. There was no requirement to look at the economics of climate change. In the end, the great news story is this is the first case, the first time a coal mine has been refused on the merit in New South Wales. And the judge ultimately found that the project should not be approved, notwithstanding the government had approved it, on the basis that the economics just simply don't justify the social and environmental impacts that the mine would have. So it was just a tremendous success. It was a success that we'd been building towards for 10 years. We'd been lodging merit appeal and merit appeal against coal mine approval, greenfield new coal mines, and we were getting much better outcomes. We were getting great conditions put on. We almost even got a greenhouse gas offset condition, but we didn't. The judge said, oh, we don't really need one of those because we're about to get a carbon tax. Anyway, we did get one, but then it disappeared. I feel like going back to court and saying, hey, now we don't have one, this company needs to do a bit more. But at the end of the day, really, the reality for us is Rio Tinto lodged one of the biggest appeals you could imagine against our win. And we were dragged through the New South Wales Court of Appeal. We had the Chief Justice of New South Wales sitting on that bench, plus the President of the court. It was an insanely large and very legally, very technical appeal. That picture was taken the day the judgment was handed down in that, and our clients won again. So Rio tried, and yeah. So it was, and the remarkable thing is this crew of people have never given up hope. Now, the little twist to the end of the story, and perhaps arguably the sad part, and the reason I tell you this story is because it gives you a bit of a flavour for really what the journey of climate litigation can look like. So several months later, Rio Tinto, so the government passed a few tweaks to its state policies and its mining laws, and Rio Tinto lodges a new application, and the new application is so similar to the one that was refused in the court. I couldn't really find any substantial differences. And now in New South Wales, the government is saying, oh yeah, it's approvable, it's in an approvable form, perhaps we should be approving it. So here we are again, less than 2 years later, really. But they haven't yet quite approved it. And naturally, if they do, we'll be looking at what we can do to maintain and sustain the success of that community, and a community that the whole country has rallied around. The Warkworth story and the Bulga story has really been told now as the modern-day David Goliath. Obviously, there's so many volumes that I could speak to you about why that is and really what it means in terms of climate litigation and the development of that. But ultimately, it may be that we end up in court again. We're also in court at the moment over the Watermark mine, the Shenhua Watermark mine, which is a really, really controversial mine that Greg Hunt just gave his final approval for on the Liverpool Plains, one of the most productive food bowls of New South Wales. We're challenging that as we speak, and we've also got a Commonwealth challenge against the as well. With our sister organisation, EDO Queensland, we're running the Commonwealth case against the Adani mine. And there may be some news on that in the next couple of weeks. So, we are very, very active. We've had some great successes. But really, it is extremely exciting to have, our overseas colleague here to talk about a different climate litigation success. But without taking any wind, I'm just going to give you one caution in terms of excitement. We do have very different legal systems. Australia has a very, very conservative legal system, and we're already punching our way through those conservative walls with the kind of highest kicks we can give and the biggest forks we can throw. But we've got a lot to learn, and we've still got a long journey ahead of us. But not as much time as we'd all like to have. So it is absolutely terrific that we have got this opportunity, and you can rest assured that with these public events that we're holding to host Marianne and have this story told, we're also doing a lot of in-house talking and experience sharing and document sharing as well, so that we hopefully can pick up some lessons and look perhaps in crevices and corners we haven't yet looked. So it's exciting times ahead of us. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Sue. It was wonderful for us Queenslanders to hear of the victories in EDO New South Wales as well. We also did our lawyers clapping and dancing around the office as well. Now, Michelle Maloney is the chair of EDO Queensland. Unfortunately, she really was not very well at all tonight, but she asked me to thank everyone who sent her wishes to get well, and she really had so much hope to be here and hear the good news from the Netherlands. But she also appreciated all the texts and messages people have sent. Now, it occurred to me I should also thank the many of you who are monthly donors or occasional donors or otherwise financially supporting EDO Queensland. We still have, as was mentioned, no government funding whatsoever, so to continue to run these wonderful cases, we really do need your support. So if you were thinking you might like to be a monthly donor, please see one of the EDO staff, or if you'd like to make a one-off donation, that's also very welcome. We do even have your old-fashioned bucket, which is right there near the door. if you'd like to just make a one-off donation tonight. And if someone could possibly go in and find it and pass it round, that'd be great. It's just over there near the door. Any volunteer to go and get that for us? So moving along to our next speaker. So Marianne Menesma is our special guest from the Netherlands. She's been named the most influential person in the field of sustainability for 3 years running. Her career as a social environmental entrepreneur has spanned a variety of fields. Maybe that was a mistake getting that passed around. We're going to hear rattling the whole time, but actually... Okay, right. She's had degrees in business management as well as law, and Marianne worked for Shell. And in her own words, I wanted the oil company to change from the inside out. When that didn't happen, I went back to study law and philosophy. So that path led Marianne to take the reins for Greenpeace for 3 years in the Netherlands. She's got quite a variety of other work experience, but today she is the director of Agenda. That organisation has done a lot of work in terms of sustainability, policy reform, all sorts of practical initiatives. But fairly recently, they decided to become litigants in the court, and that led to the inspiring victory, the victory whereby a non-government community organisation was able to go to court and run an action to force a government to change its policy and do more on climate change. What an inspiring outcome. So please give Marianne a very warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. And I thought there would be many people in the audience that are not lawyers, so I'm not going to talk for 50 minutes in a row on law. If you're now very unhappy, let me know, because then I'll switch. But I first would like to tell you a little bit about where I came from and what Agenda used to do and why we did make the switch, why we think that this was necessary, and that this is not the only thing we need to do to be in time for the next generations. And as just was told, I have kind of broad background, so I come from different corners, studied very different things, 3 bachelors, 3 masters, etc. And in law, I did graduate on climate change. So in the early 90s, I was at the first conference of the parties. And at that time, people were worried, but not really worried, I would say. And then when time passes on and you keep following all the universities and so on and see all the different pieces coming out of science, and then you get 3 children. My 3 children are all born this century, and then you think, what will the second half of our century be? And then it really goes into your toes, as I call it. So it's not only a brain thing anymore, but it's something more like you get angry that things are not moving quickly enough. So I've been doing very many different things, and I think it's important to know that Agenda was in the beginning an organization that wanted to change the things for the good. So we were not against something, we were pro things. So we were looking like, what should the world be looking like and what should we do to make the change that we want? So we were working with the front runners in society and help them to grow. And we were looking, well, what things do we need to do to get at our vision? And if nobody else is doing it, we will do it ourselves. So we did very many different things that nobody else did in order to create this transition. Because the last job before I went to the Agenda I was the director of an Institute for Transitions at the Erasmus University, and we studied all those processes, which usually take a few generations, and for a very long time you don't really see the change. That's how, say, the first part here. And in case of energy, the old paradigm, that is, say, the big central coal-fired power plants and so on, and Shell and everything. And you don't really notice the change, but a lot of people, like the people here in the front, are working on the change, but you don't see it. And then at a certain point of time, it really sparks off, and then you get this middle period, which is really the period of chaos. A lot of newcomers coming into the field, which is renewables and so on, and the old system will fight the newcomers. And so this is a period which is not really nice. It's not nice dialogues anymore, and we're really there. And you can end up at a higher level in a more sustainable society, but you can just as well go down to a place where you don't want to live. And it's us who have to try to steer it in that direction. And this is not a blueprint or anything, but it's just that we should know where we want to go and try to, well, hit all the buttons that are necessary to make the change. You never know exactly how it is, but you do know, well, pretty much which sides of the wheel to turn and which sides you absolutely don't want to turn. And so it is not a blueprint, but it is a way to work. And then you might come up at a new paradigm, which probably will be a world on renewables, much more decentralized, much more also community-owned, etc., etc. So I'd been working for 5 years with Agenda only on the positive sides, and then after 5 years I was looking back and I thought, are we moving quickly enough in the right direction? Are we doing the things that we need to do? Because we were working with a lot of people and tried to get these bottom-up groups doing the right things. We had an action plan for the long term. We had 5 big icon projects and everything was going well. But when you then look back and you think, we only actually have 20 years, if you look at the best scientists, to make the move to a sustainable society, we were not moving quickly enough. We were moving in the right direction, but not quickly enough. So in the first 5 years, I actually didn't work at all with government because I thought that they're not doing the right things anyway. So I stopped thinking about them. But then after 5 years, you look back and you think, maybe they should align with us. And so we started to do different things. I think one of the things that we did still in the old system was we started a day of sustainability, and we told people, well, on this day, this will be the day of sustainability. We just invented it. And then all schools in the Netherlands started to talk in the morning about sustainability, and then businesses would open new stores exactly on that day, and in university people would have a conference, and all people tried to do their thing on that day, and there were 100,000 of people doing this. And then the newspaper thought, oh, sustainability is bigger than we thought, because there's so many people working on it, but it's hardly known to the bigger audience. And if you make one day and everybody comes out, then suddenly you see how big it is, much bigger than you think. And then we had a subsidy scheme in the Netherlands for solar panels, and it was first come, first serve. So in the first 5 minutes, you would do it by computer. The computer was completely crashed, and then it was all over, because there were clever companies that had 50 students that would just do the work, and then they had all the subsidy. And then there were about 40,000 people that had wanted to have subsidy for the solar panels on their own roof, and they didn't get it. And I thought, well, if I would collect all those 40,000 people and I would buy for them at once the solar panels, can I not bring the price down then as much as covering the subsidy that they normally would have gotten? So I asked a few people that I knew, what do I need to do? How many solar panels do I need to buy to get the price really down? And those were people from the Technical University in the Netherlands that had been in China for 15 years, checking on the solar business, and they went out there. And I forgot them. And then 1 month before the Day of Sustainability was there, they came back to me and said, we did it. We have a deal for you. If you buy 50,000 solar panels and inverters, we have the price 1/3 down as compared to the market price at that time. And I thought, wow, this is great. So I thought it's a bit strange because I had to do it within a month, because thereafter the price would already be going up again. Well, that's normally not a real time that you can collect 50,000 solar panels from and have people coming along with you. But I was then talking to a newspaper, and I told them, well, I'm going to do a collective buying initiative on solar panels. What do you think about it? And without telling me, they put it on the front of the newspaper on the Day of Sustainability, Agenda stunts with solar panels. And I didn't tell it at that time to any of my colleagues, so they would be calling me like, are we doing anything on solar panels? I said, oh, forgot to tell you. Yes, we are. And then we had thousands of phone calls of all people that said, we want to join in, but are they black or are they blue, or what's the size? And actually, we didn't really know, so we had to go back to the guys in China and said, are they black or are they blue, and are they mono, or etc. So within a month, you are an expert on solar, and we could answer all these people. And then after a month, we really had thousands of people that said, yeah, we want to join you, we buy your solar panels, and we put on 20% upfront. So there were millions in a new bank account from all people that trusted me on my blue eyes. I'd never sold a solar panel before, which was really, I think, to me also kind of, encouraging that people just trust you and say, yeah, we think you will do it. And then I thought it's very easy. Now I have the 20% to go to a bank and say I need for 6 weeks some money, because normally you pay when it comes off the factory, then it goes on a boat for 5 weeks, and 6 weeks later you get the money from the client. But there was not any bank in the Netherlands that would like to give me the money for 6 weeks, because they simply said there's a risk committee, you have no own money, you have never done it before, no. And I knew all the CEOs from the big banks in the Netherlands, and they all said, very nice, Marianne, but I cannot make this decision, you have to go to the risk committee, and they simply said no. So I had to fly to China, and I went to these very big companies and said, look, I have already sold them, and I want to buy your solar panels, but I don't have the money, can you help me? And they said, this might be a new business model, because the subsidy schemes in the whole of Europe are going down, and collective buying might be a new idea, so we support you. You have to pay us 3 weeks after the solar panels have arrived in the Netherlands, and we give you a few cents per, as it's called, watt-peak additional decrease of the price, and can you make it then? I said, well, I think so. So we emailed all those thousands of people, yes, we're going to do it, and if you pay 3 weeks in advance, you get 50 euros additional discount. And then all those people paid. So without ever having received any solar panel, they simply all paid, and I had 20 million euros in a bank account without selling anything. So this was really special. And then when they arrived, I paid the Chinese people and everything. So we didn't need a bank account, we didn't need any subsidy, nothing. And thousands of people in the Netherlands got their first solar panels. And then thereafter, of course, a lot of people think, oh, that's a nice business model. I can do collective buying, and now there are hundreds of them in the Netherlands. And that's typically the things that we do. We try to invent new things and then do it, and then thereafter the market will pick it up, and then we'll do something else. So we did the same with electric cars. There was one electric car that was made in series at that time, about 7 years ago. We ordered that, and then we sold it to the city of Amsterdam and a few others, and then the city thought, now we have electric cars, so we need charging points. So they started to put public charging points on the street, and then that market started to evolve, and then we move out again and we'll do the new thing. So actually we were doing a lot of nice things, and we were having a lot of fun. And still, I thought it's not enough. So we were evaluating, like, okay, we're sticking to this approach, so we do the thing with the front runners, but we have to take the government on board as well. So that was kind of new, because before that people really saw us as the organization for the front runners, for the citizens and all the newcomers and so on, and we would not be working with government or any other things. And of course, we know that science is very clear, and you might know that too. But a lot of people really rather have a next report or whatsoever, and they rather stick their heads in the ground, and they don't want to move. And as you know, for 800,000 years, the CO2 has been between 180 and 280 parts per million. So everybody who says it changed all the time, yes, and every 100,000 years we have an ice age, yes, but it's between a confined boundary, and now we're up there. And the last time that we had 400 ppm the whole year round was 3 million years ago, and then the sea level was 40 meters higher, we did not have a North Pole anymore, and the Sahara was green. It's an unlivable world. And I didn't want to tell these type of stories to people, because that's really, you get depressed, it's not very funny, the solution side is much funnier. But I thought, every time I give such a positive story and people go home and they think, that was a nice story, they just go on where they were and nothing changes. So when we invented the new strategy, I thought I should talk and start with the part about the urgency. And I do that for about 1/3 of the talk, and just at a point when everybody is too depressed to do anything, then I'll stop and then I'll go on with the solutions to make sure that they go home happy. But hopefully they go home with another vision, and they will think the next day, maybe I should do something myself. Because that's what we need to do. Everybody needs to do something. It can't be done only by government, it can't be done only by the big governments, it's we. We are the one who choose our politicians. We are the one who buy. We are the one who can put solar panels on the roof. So that's, say, my new kind of strategy is a little bit of urgency. I'll go on with that and then see when you're really depressed, and then I switch. And then I move on to the solution side. So, and why am I in such a rush? Well, that's basically because the science says if you wait until 2050, which is the big red line on top, before you are back at the level that's a livable world, well, you run out of this graph, and your children wouldn't experience it anymore. And if we would stop with all CO2 immediately, you have this green line, you're only back at the 350 ppm, which is seemed as a reasonable good level at the end of this century. So anytime we are later, we're just making it very difficult for our children to have a livable world. And so many things will already have changed that they really can't do much about it anymore. So there's a lot of people out there, even governments and Shell and everybody, that says we can wait until 2050 and then do the trick. But the thing with CO2 is that it adds up and it stays there for hundreds of years. So it's not that if you stop, then you have a perfect world. It's still there. And that's the thing I think we have to come to a grasp to, that it adds up. And therefore, the quicker we move, the better it is. And I was very happy with the judge in the Netherlands who put this in writing. He really said the quicker we move, the better it is, and also the cheaper it is. So there were many other results in this court case that will help us, because when the judge puts it in writing, it's more or less a kind of fact. Then we don't have to discuss this all the time. And we are heading for the 2 degrees, but actually the best scientists say 2 degrees is even too much, because what we are doing now, going for this 2 degrees, then we have a 50% chance that we'll make it. Well, if there would be a bridge ahead and you would say you have 50% chance to survive it, you would not go on it, and you would certainly not put your children on that bridge. But we do accept in cases of climate change that we go for this level of 2 degrees and for only 50% chance of success. I'm not very happy about that. And there's many people that don't want anything to do with climate or with biodiversity and so on. And usually I tell to them about coffee and chocolate, because coffee and chocolate are important to most people. And the production of it already fell almost 50%, both at the east and the west coast of Africa, due to climate change, because the night temperatures there are already up with 1-2 degrees. And therefore, the most farmers in that region are now considering, are we going on with chocolate and climate and coffee, or are we going to do something else? And people are moving, and do we want a world where chocolate and coffee is only for the very rich people? Or do we try to get the temperatures down and keep it? Well, of course, you know about many fires and water and North Pole declining and the South Pole declining. And are you depressed already? And I think actually it's more important to focus on water and food. Because if you've seen what happened in California in the past 4 years, there were enormous droughts. And California is 20% of all the food of America comes from California. I didn't know that either. But those farmers, after 4 years of results like this, are now moving. They're going to the city, or they're going up to areas where it's still all right. And what's happening over there is going to happen everywhere in the world. So that's my main concern, not that the water level will be so high that my house, which is 6 meters under sea level, will be underwater, because we are quite good at building dikes, and for the next 50 years it will probably be okay. But I think much earlier we will have a world in war, because people are moving, hundreds of millions of them, and they will be fighting for the areas where there's still food and water. And this is a situation of complete chaos. And that is what I'm most afraid of for my children. And therefore I do tell these stories, because most people have no clue what 2 degrees, 4 degrees means. We're heading for 4 to 6 degrees. That's really a chaos world. And you, of course, know that lots of the CO2, luckily, is not in the air yet, but went into the ocean. Large absorptions in the ocean, but therefore it's already 30% more acidic. And probably, if we don't act quickly enough, already in 2050, your reefs will not look like this, but look like that. And I've been looking at the reef, and I already thought that it was much worse than 20 years ago. So, in the end, it's not about just nicely a few more degrees on the beach. It's about food and it's about water. And in the end, I think about war. And that might sound a bit exaggerated, but that's what it is, I think. And we should be telling each other. And now we move. Because I think there is still a way out. We have 20 years to make the switch, and then we can still make it a livable world. And we have it all in our hands. That's the thing that I'm most angry at. There's nothing we have to invent. There's nothing that's not there yet that we can not do. We can make the switch. And if we all do our little thing in our place, then together it adds up to quite a lot. And that's why we published a report last year for the Netherlands, because I give those talks very often, and then most people, especially the experts, will say, yeah, you might be right, but it's not possible. So I've been working for 2-3 years with all people in the Netherlands that have some brains, so either professors or institutes or whatsoever, and I sat in numerous groups and I asked them, okay, is there any reason why this is not possible that I can accept? Because if it's physics, okay, but if we do have the technique, if we do have the money, if there's enough personnel, why shouldn't we not do it? And in the end, after a year, we issued this report and they all said, yeah, we agree with you. It's possible. We don't have to invent anything. And as the Netherlands, we can also afford it. And we have enough people to make the switch. The only thing is, yeah, it's never been done before, the government might not want it, all kinds of other things. But the report's name is, it's possible if you really want it. So it's really this urgency that we should feel in our toes, I think, to make the switch. And so we described in this book what needs to be done. And the first thing most people ask is, what will it cost? And usually I start at the other end. I said, well, this system is just as energy secure and just as safe as it is right now. So it's not that you have blackouts all the time and things like that. And it will create 150,000 jobs at least. And we were all very, we didn't want to exaggerate anything. So I actually think that it will be more than that. And of course, if you determine and you say we want to go there within 20 years, you will already spark off a lot of innovation because you have this goal. And in the end, the Netherlands system is very much relying on the gas we have. You might have a lot of coal, we have a lot of gas. And we have been using that for heating our houses and heating the water and a lot of other things, the greenhouses we have, etc. And in 20 years' time, our gas is gone. So then we have to move on and go to Russia and say, we want your gas. Well, do you want to be dependent on Russia? Well, I don't want that. And there's many other people that don't want it either. So if we would make this switch within 20 years, we have calculated with this model, and that was a very old-fashioned model, which was agreed upon by both Shell and all the NGOs. So it's not a right or a left-wing model, but just very basic. And that said, well, in the end, we will be having a system that's 3 billion cheaper than if you would go on with fossil fuels and buy your gas from Mr. Putin. And what does it cost? It costs 1.5% of GDP, which is a lot of money. But we spend 2.5% on oil now when we don't even see it. So for us, it's an affordable amount of money that we can still do. And if we do it, after 20 years, we give our children a system that's 100% renewable and that's safe and that's independent. So I would say, if that's possible within 20 years, we should do it. There's no good reason not to do it. But we also work on the solution side. So in this report, it's about 5 big things we need to do. And the first one is our building environment. 1/3 of all CO2 comes from the whole chain around our own buildings. And we are working on energy neutral houses. And a lot of people don't really know what we mean. They think it might be very green houses or really colorful, or they think it's something to do with biodiversity or with goats. And we have a whole movement around the tipping point, so they think it might have something to do with that. But it's just very normal Dutch houses. And in the past 2 years, we have made 25 houses energy neutral for an amount of between 30 and 35,000 euros. And in the Netherlands, average household spends almost 35,000 euros on energy in 15 years' time. So if you would look over 15 years what you spend on energy and give to an energy company, it's 35,000. If you would bring it forward and you spend this money on making your house energy neutral, so you have a house without an energy bill and you run your own energy, then you could pay off the 35,000 in 15 years' time, and your monthly fee would still be the same. So that's what we're doing now, and we have proven that it's possible. And before we did this, it cost 60 to 80,000 euros, all other actors that are in the field. So we have half the prices. And again, this is because we do it differently, because all the other actors are putting a lot of money into insulation, like complete new walls and new roofs around the house, and thereafter they do the solar panels and so on. And we say, no, we do some insulation if it's really bad, the house, but if it's reasonably good, that's not necessary, because you like a house that breathes, and you don't like a house that's completely, well, doesn't have any clue what's the outside world. And then we put on solar panels, or we put on heat pumps, or well, we have 10, 20 different kind of solutions, and every house is different. But it's possible, and we're now up for the next 100. And what we try to do now is convince the pension funds in the Netherlands, which have billions of money, and they don't know where to spend it in the Netherlands, to put this in a big fund. So everybody could lend money, pay it back in 15 years' time, even with a little bit of interest, so they have it back. And then they could make a very big success for the Netherlands, and also take their social role, which I think the pension funds have to take. So that's one of the big things we are doing at the moment, and which is really very nice, and a lot of people are happy with it. And the second big thing we are doing is on the mobility scene. And the electric cars in the Netherlands have been growing very quickly, and there are more and more charging points, because that's some people are afraid that they can't charge the car. And what I always like is what you see on top of it, is that there are now 250 charging points in the Netherlands, which are for fast charging. So within 15 minutes, you have your car almost loaded, and you can drive hundreds of kilometers again. When we started with the project, these fast charging stations were more than 100,000 euros. And everybody told me, this will never work, this will not going to happen. Well, there are now a few companies that do this without any cent of subsidy scheme, and they have already 250 in the whole of the Netherlands. Well, we are kind of small, 200 kilometers by 100. So this is more than enough for our country, so you can do charging everywhere. And so when people say it's not possible, I don't believe that unless there's a physical reason. So what we did, we imported this first car and that I told you about, which was really a car that most men didn't want to be found in, at least not alive. But the funny thing about it was that it's 90%, 95% renewable, because it's all made from materials that are not metal and so on. So it was really invented as an electric car. It's not so very heavy and so on, so it could ride easily to 200 kilometers. And the next generation cars, like the one I drive currently, this is a very heavy car. It's actually nonsense to have a car of 1,000 kilos to drive someone much less. And, but that was a car that the men did like. And now we have, of course, the Tesla. Well, that's the one people really like, but we cannot afford it yet. But the next generation, I hope, will be affordable. And I'm really interested in what's happening now that organizations like Google and Apple are coming in, because they are the newcomers that really challenge the old big Ford and the big companies that didn't want to move very quickly up to now, but now they are challenged, and they are actually on the battery science and so on, so the battery prices are going down very quickly, and I think we will see a new automobile sector quite quickly with all these new coming. And then we should combine, of course, because you want to drive an electric car, but not on a coal-fired power plant. And in the Netherlands, it's already the case that if you look from well to wheel, it's better to drive an electric car than to drive a car on gasoline. But we are working on the new solutions, and it's more probably like that. And there's a lot of university working on what they call the car as a power plant. If you have 1 million cars in 2020, all these batteries are standing still for 90% of the time because most people don't use their car the whole day. Well, if you then have this smart grid, then you can use the batteries at the times that they are not being used to drive. And that's now happening in small projects, and that should be scaled up in the next 10 years. And of course, we should also look at changing societies. There's more and more older people that don't want to sit behind the windows, and this is probably not the right solution, but we might find other solutions. But what I want to stress is that you should not look at it from an energy sector and a mobility sector and etc., but that you should look for the integral solutions, and that's one of the things that we are doing. Well, then the third part in the report was on food. I'm not going in the details now, and the next one was on the big factories. And in the report, we only took 2% energy savings a year. That was already enough to bring around the change. But they can do much more than that. And we should move, of course, to a circular society, and we should move to a society that's bio-based and doesn't use oil for plastic and for all kinds of other things. Well, and if you do this, so on the housing, on the mobility, on the food, and on the big factories, then we have spent 50% less on energy, and the rest can easily be done by a lot of wind and sun. And then to a certain extent, a little bit biomass and geothermal, but very little. And if you see this picture, the biggest square, if you put that full with concentrated solar power, it's enough for energy for the whole world. So we have enough room, we have enough sun. It's only a matter of organizing it differently. And I don't want to say that we want all the energy from that part of the world, but because we are living a little bit up there. But you should use your services much better. And a lot of services are roofs that are unused yet, but you can have all kinds of other services which we should use for energy, and we should be more clever about that. So in this book, we also focused what can people do. So at the end of the book, we have all kinds of different solutions, what you can do in your own home. So that's what we're doing most of the time. So we are looking for this power shift, and we work with business, with government, with citizens. And what I would like to stress is that an activist in the dictionary is someone who acts. And that is actually what we need to do. We need to stop talking and thinking the other is going to make the change. We should make the change. And that's really the movement that we are normally in and trying to do. And I think it's now the time that we should also get onto our feet and show it. Last year there was a big meeting on climate change, and there were 800,000 people in the streets in different big cities, and that made a change. And at the end of the year we will have the big climate change convention happening in Paris. I think there will be more than 1 million people in the street, and I think that this does make a difference. So it's not only, say, retweet and I like you or I like something, but it's also to put yourself in physical, because I think that's necessary to show the leaders that we're really fed up with it and we want it differently. So we are supporting that as well. And I think the divestment campaign is a very strong one because it fights the system from the economic and financial sector. It doesn't say anything about you should believe in climate change. It simply says it might not be such a good investment, and it might take 1 year or 5 years, but at a certain point, people will stop investing in coal, and there will be a price on carbon, and so on and so on. And if we really take the 2 degrees seriously, we can only use 1/5 of all coal, oil and gas in the ground, and 4/5 should stay there. And I think it's a matter of time before we start to make this switch. And I already see that analysts are making lower credit ratings for companies that used to be AAA. So that's kind of interesting, because those people don't believe in climate change at all, but they simply read the newspapers and they see more and more, we don't like Shell anymore, we don't want coal anymore, 40% of all coal-fired power plants in the USA are shut down, China is going into renewables, etc., etc. And simply looking at all those data makes them conclude we are moving from fossils to renewables. And I think this is a very interesting campaign. We are supporting people in university that go to our pension fund that's still largely investing in fossil fuels and demanding them to go out. And when we were there for the first time, they didn't want to listen. But after the 10th, and after a lot of pressure from all kinds of students and people working at universities, they're now making the switch. So it helps to go out and raise your voice. And you see that very large organizations like the Rockefellers that have a lot of money are now moving out of fossil fuels. So you see The change is coming. And for Australia, I would say, don't wait until the last coal mine is not necessary anymore, but be far more forward-looking and go into renewables and stop with all these new coal mines, because it's just a very bad investment. Now, this is where you came for. Yeah. Then the last thing we really did as a new campaign was this court case. We have a group of people in the Netherlands that is a kind of think tank with all kinds of people from different corners of society, CEOs, etc. And one of them is a lawyer called Roger Cox. And he had 2 children and was reading what was happening with the world, and he said, I'm just very worried, particularly about climate change. And he started to read everything from all IPCC reports from the past 15 years. So he really spent years to get everything, and then he thought, what's the way out? And he thought it won't be the politics, and it won't. Well, he doesn't believe that we, as with pressure from society, will be quickly enough. He thought the only thing that's still in the democratic system that will be quickly enough might be the judge. If we put all the facts in front of the judge, a judge is not a political entity. They will just look at facts, and maybe then the judge will see that this is such a big problem that we need to move forward way quicker. And I read his book and I thought, yeah, I think we should give it a go. So let's try it. And I asked one other lawyer that I knew to combine, and the 2 of them did this whole job in the past several years. And we invited James Hansen, one of the best climate scientists in the world, I believe, and had an event around it and told people, well, we think climate change is such a big problem, we should move much quicker. And if you want to start a court case in the Netherlands, you first have to start a discussion or a dialogue with your government. So we asked a number of people from the parliament that were in at the James Hansen happening, bring it to parliament and tell them we should move quicker. And they brought it in parliament and they had a vote, and there were 3 positive and all the others were negative. So clearly the politics wouldn't do the job. That was then proven. And then we sent a letter to the government and said, we think climate change is such a big problem, we should move out of CO2, and 40% CO2 reduction is what needs to be done in 2020. And we got a letter back from the minister that said, we agree fully that it's a very urgent problem, and we also agree that the industrialized countries have to do between 25 and 40% in 2020. But we don't want to be front runners, we want to discuss it with all other countries, so we're not going to do anything. Well, then we were allowed to start a court case. So this letter was actually quite handy later on, because the Dutch state already said it was urgent, so we didn't have to discuss that anymore. And it also said industrialized countries have to do between 25 and 40% to stay underneath the 2 degrees. So that was also very good. Because later on, of course, when they asked lawyers to come in, the lawyers said, well, that was not a very handy letter. And we might have been progressive in the early 90s, but we are not anymore. We are, say, way behind in the European Union. Out of the 25 countries, we are number 24 with only 3-4% of renewables and really lagging behind in our goals. So we introduced something new. We're not in crowdfunding or in crowdsourcing, we do crowd pleading. And we asked people in the Netherlands, please join us. If you have any court case anywhere in the world or any argument that you think is worthwhile, let us know. And if you want to be a co-plaintiff, sign on our website and we will also act on your behalf. So we had more than 1,000 people in the Netherlands that said, we want to be co-plaintiff. And then in the first phase, the government asked all their passports. So in the end, we had only 900 left, because some people think that's too much of a hassle. But we then went to court with ourselves as an NGO and almost 900 co-plaintiffs. And what we did is that we set those 2 lawyers and asked them to start working. And in the year before, we told a lot of people that we would be going to doing this. And there was a lot of talk in society whether this would be a good idea, whether it would be possible at all. The journalists would ask professors and so on, is what our agenda is wanting to do, is that possible? And everybody said no. Everybody said it's impossible. And this must be a PR stunt. This is not a real court case. And most people didn't really read what we were doing, of course. They just looked at it and thought, now going to a judge and ask the government to do something, that's not something a judge is made for. So we had a long period because you have the summons and then the government answers and then we answer, then they answer, etc. And at a certain place in time, we had the hearing, and that was this year, April. And our two lawyers thought in advance, what will be the thing that the state will bring up? And we were the first to speak. So we counted all the arguments that we thought they would have. We didn't know in advance. And then after the break, the state would be there. And the state did exactly what we had thought. So that was kind of funny. And I thought that in the break they would think about answers because they had some time. But they didn't do anything like that. So it was kind of stupid that we said in the morning, probably the state will say this and we say that. And then in the afternoon they were only doing what we expected. And the main argument in the end was, this is something that does not belong to the judge. This is something that we should decide on in politics. And I think legally they did not do a very good job. And what I think most people didn't really understand, that this is not an environmental case, it's not a human rights law, it's not public law, it's not state law, it's simple civil law. And in civil law there is a notion that's called an unlawful act. And an unlawful act is something that you have a duty of care, which you don't live up to, and you should be the one this can be attributed to. And there's a number of arguments that you need to follow before this unlawful act can be given to you. And then you say, well, a government in this case, if a government does not act, this can also be unlawful, and this can be hazardous negligence. And these are also basic norms in civil law. So we're not countering any decision or something. We're just saying a state should protect its citizens, and if you don't do that, that's unlawful. And then the special thing about this is that the duty of care that a government has is a kind of open norm. So you don't know exactly in every case what is the duty of care, in this case of the government. So a judge, to fill this in, is going to look about the surrounding world and looks what is in this case your duty of care. And because this is about climate change, the judge then will go and say, okay, there is a big climate change convention and there's a treaty that you have signed and there have been a lot of meetings that you went to and you have signed it off, etc. So all these things that you have been doing on climate change are elements that we bring into this notion of this duty of care. So the open norm is filled in with human rights, with what the EU has been saying, with what the Netherlands have been doing. So indirectly, many other fields of law are entering the civil law, but the basic thing is still civil law. So the judge kept repeating, this is not international law, so because that's between states. And it is not human rights law because that's not what's asked for here. So directly it's not all these things, but indirectly they fill in the norm, this open norm of what's the duty of care of the government. And our government has been amongst the 5 states that started the Climate Change Convention, and we have been there all the time. And in 2010, we still said we should do 30% in 2020. And we have said we should stay underneath the 2 degrees. And we put in a lot of policy documents, industrialized countries should do between 25 and 40%, as science has agreed on, to stay underneath the 2 degrees. So actually all the judge did was say, okay, you as a state, the Netherlands, have agreed on climate change should be prevented, it's very dangerous, you should stay under the 2 degrees, so 25 to 40% is what we need to do. And then your goal is 16%. That's very strange. So that's not really taking your duty of care if you yourself have said that 25% is the minimum. And then all the other elements were kind of easy. So, of course, the state had a lot of other arguments, but those were not the most important one. This was the most important one, and the judge really grasped that, and he said, you are right. And he was very much aware that this is a new question, but he wanted to stress very much that it's a legal question. So it's not a policy question. The legal question is your government doing the minimum level of care that it's required to do? And he kept on stressing that, because that will be, of course, the thing that if the government will appeal, that they will be stressing, that this is a policy thing and that it's not up to the judge and so on. And the main question is it unlawful, hazardous negligence? And the answer from the judge was yes, because of this whole body around climate change convention and so on. And the second thing was, does the state not have the discretionary power to say, well, I'm not going to do the minimum level? And then the judge said, no, you have discretionary power, so I won't ask you to do 40%, but you should do the minimum of 25%, because that is what you need to do to protect your citizens. And then for the rest, you can do 40%, 25%, whatever you want, and you can do it by closing down coal mines, putting more windmills down, whatever you want. I'm not going to tell anything about how you have to do it, but the 25 is an absolute minimum. And that's a legal thing, and that's what needs to be stressed, I think, that this is not a policy thing. If the state's there to protect the citizens and the state have declared themselves that the minimum level is 25%, then you should stick to that. So I think there are many important conclusions in the court, and I really encourage you to read it, because they translated it themselves. So at the minute that it came out in the open, there was both a Dutch and an English version, which they never do. So this is very special. Usually we did all the translations from our summons and our reply and so on, but it took us months and a lot of money. And this they did for us, well, not for us, but I think more or less for us. And I think it's interesting to see, because he agreed, the judges, the three judges agreed on many things. So they said it's irreversible, it's serious, climate change, there's a need for precautionary measures, etc. And you should do the 2% target as you promised to do that. And there's a very high chance of endangered climate change, because that's all set down in the body of knowledge around climate change is very clear. And we have the whole IPCC process of thousands of different scientists every 5 to 7 years that say this is the standard at the moment, and there's no discussion about it. So we didn't have to bring in any specialist or something, because all the reports are there, and we brought them all to the table. And it's very clear that mitigation measures should be taken as soon as possible. He also said adaptation is not doing the job, CCS is not doing the job, and you cannot wait until 2050. And so there's many things in this court that are written down, which are very important, I think, also for the future, for us and for others.
How do we get a copy?
It's all on agenda.nl, and then there's a little flag that's English, and you point on it, and you see climate case, and it's all there. So I think that the main thing is the state has a very serious duty of care to take measures to prevent climate change. And the state has a crucial role in that and should take a high level of care, because that was what's stated within the European Union, and we are part of that. And therefore we should use our instruments, and the F is for framework. Couldn't fit that anymore on the place. So the conclusion was there is a duty of care to mitigate. And you have this range between 25 and 40%. The judge asked the minimum, and the state has to do it. So we were in court, and really I thought that our two lawyers did a very good job, but we were very much afraid that the judges would not be able to grasp, because it's such a big topic, and we put so many piles on their desk, which they had to read through and then come to the conclusion it's a very big problem, it should be handled very quickly, the state's responsible, and then you should dare to say as a judge, you should do more, which never been done before. So I thought it was possible, but do not dare to hope that it will happen. And everybody in the Netherlands had said, you will never win. And then we were sitting there, and I was twittering in the front page, like he was starting off with, climate change is a big problem. And I thought, well, that's already quite nice that you say this. And it's caused by men. Okay, great. And he went on, and then suddenly he said, and therefore you have to do the 25%. And we're like, wow! And we were not allowed to say anything, so I could only do this. But there was a second group of people that were in a separate room, and they were already yelling and joining, etc. And then when the judge had left the room, well, everybody was crying, falling in each other's arms, and so on. And there was a lot of TV and journalists and so on. So the days thereafter, we were all over the place. And I could really sense that people felt a kind of relief and hope that it is possible to do something, and that governments cannot go on and do what they like, but that there are small groups that can make a change. So I think in a certain way it is much more than only a court case, because we received reactions from all over the world, people that had hope again and that started new things. And what's happened in the past few weeks is that the newspapers in the Netherlands had 2 pages on solutions and said 25% is easy, and they went to all kind of experts. So the discussions that we never had in the main newspapers, we suddenly had. And it was finally on TV, because TV usually doesn't want to do anything on climate change because that's boring. And all the things that we have been trying for years that we didn't get into the media now suddenly are part of the media. And I think that's a large win as well. And we hope, of course, that there's many countries that are going to do the same. The Belgians have already started a court case. The Norwegians are starting one. And I think there will be more and more. And you know that sometimes it takes years before a first judge makes the switch, like what happened in America about black and whites not were able to go to school together. At a certain point, there was a judge that said, this is contrary to our constitution, we should mingle. And that was a brave judge. And we were just very lucky that at the first court case, we already had a brave judge and a very wise judge. And I really think that these 3 people deserve a Nobel Prize, because I think we don't really know or notice at the moment how big this decision was. And I think there are many chances for Australia, because you do have a democratic system, even though you think it might not always be working perfectly. But in most democratic systems, a citizen can go to the judge and say, we have to be protected from a government that doesn't act as it should act. And your government is also, just as ours, not doing very much. And we have 0.5% of total emissions, you have 1.5%, and our judge clearly said, well, every country should do its own part, and for the Netherlands this is 0.5%, this is not too small to act, everybody should do its own part. And I think for your country holds the same. You also have a country with a lot of economic interest in coal, we have it in gas, so there's actually more similarities than I thought in the beginning. And I hope that you can use, I think 80% of what we have done you can simply use. You don't have to do the research again. It's translated, it's all there. And the last part is making the translation in your own law system. And we will be very happy to think with you. I think you have great lawyers here, and I think there are many chances. And maybe you won't win the first, and maybe not even the second, but at a certain point things will move. And we are very important in that too, because if judges and if government feel that the people want it differently, they in the end will follow, because both judges and government are following what's happening in society. Law is not a static thing. Law changes over time on the basis of the norms in society. And if we speak out more, and if we demand more solar, wind and other things, and you don't have to think that there should be millions of people speaking out, because if you just collectively with hundreds of people send emails every day, they already think, oh, something's happening. You can do things with much smaller groups than you think. In big companies, if they receive 20 complaints, they already have a task force on it. So things are much easier than you every now and then think. And I think this country has many chances, because you have much more sun and solar power because you are here than we. And we are moving, and we can do it within 20 years, you can do it within 20 years. And then you create new jobs, and you have all kinds of chances of making a new economy, which is far more attractive to young people than going for the old coal-fired power plants, which have less jobs and which are dirty jobs. So I hope that we can help a little bit of getting more energy in the system and making the change that's needed. I hope that it will be a leader one time. And you know, we only have 20 years. And we can fight systems, because there's so much things you can do. And everybody that always says, well, it's not possible. There's so many ideas that I gave you today where you could see that if you go for it, it really can happen. And nothing is impossible. And afterwards you will always see, wow, it was possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That was a wonderful presentation and so inspiring. We now have time for questions, and what I didn't let you know before is this event is being webcast, and there are people listening in the Northern Territory, WA, South Australia and Tassie. So all of this really valuable information is being accessed by people all over the country. It will also be on the website. So if you check out the EDO Queensland website, we'll hopefully by tomorrow at least have a link to where it is. Some very exciting news, or rather a teaser that there will be exciting news in a day or two, is that EDO Queensland and EDO New South Wales are working together closer than ever on climate litigation, and very soon we will be establishing a fund to help us supercharge our efforts to do more climate change challenging the bad fossil fuel projects, but also to investigate these innovative legal actions such as Marianne has mentioned tonight. So watch that space. So I'll now ask Paul. Paul has a number of questions that have been provided to us. So we're now into question time. So if you had a question that you'd like to ask one of our speakers, but in particular Marianne, have a little bit of a think. We're going to have the microphone roving in a minute or two. And if you're listening via the webcast, Paul, is Paul around? Could you perhaps come up, Paul, and we can advise people listening by webcast how they can send their questions in.
Excellent. To anyone listening by webcast, if you just tag EDO Queensland in your question, it'll pop up and we'll pass it to our panel. Thank you.
Alrighty, so it's now about 7:30, so we have half an hour for questions. The microphone is with Paul, so who has a question they'd like to ask? And I might invite Marianne to come back up, and if you can ask questions of any of the presenters, but maybe Marianne can be here with me on the stage, and then when the question's relevant, I might ask Sean and or Sue to join us on the stage. First question, please.
What I've heard so far is that, and having listened to the Late Line thing, there seems to be some question about how possible it will be within Australia's legal framework to adopt this approach. And I wondered if anybody in EDO had yet identified where those problems are, and if so, can they explain them?
Thank you. So the question was, how difficult would it be under Australian law to adopt the same type of court case as was run in the Netherlands, and had anyone at the EDO identified those problems and how to overcome them? So Sue Higginson, I think, is best placed to address that question. Sue, would you like to come up here?
Sure. We do have a bit of difficulty. I'm not saying it's entirely insurmountable, but we don't have a kind of open way, so to speak, as establishing a duty of care as what happened in the Netherlands. We have very, very rigid terms of what is a duty of care. We already have a very, very broad category of established duties of care, such as doctors to their patients, lawyers to their clients, etc. We actually have law that says governments don't have a duty of care to citizens per se. What we have is a system of administrative law, and that's how we hold our governments to account, not through the laws that invoke negligence and things like that. So our tort law and our civil law in Australia has been very much developed on the basis of, non-government parties versing each other and working out whether there's a duty of care between those. Also, what happened in the Dutch case was that we have one really primary factor. So let's say we did establish that there is a duty of care on part of governments and to its citizens broadly, then one of the things that we have in our law of negligence that has really never been lapsed is what we call the but-for test, and it relates to causation. So the causation of the foreseeable harm. So there's a few, general principles of the law of negligence and torts, but just cutting to the chase of those, in Australia we do, in proving causation, we have this idea that but for, and in this case it would be but for the Australian government not doing something that we say is the particular thing it ought to do, would climate change still happen? Well, the answer to that is, well, regardless of what Australia does alone, the idea is it's still going to happen the way to some extent. So we've got that difficulty. What happened in the Netherlands, which is quite fantastic, and there was a precedent for this which related to the pollution of the Rhine River, was that the judge was able to actually set aside that test. It's something I've never seen done in Australia, and just basically here we say that but-for test has a really fancy Latin name. I'm not going to use it because I actually can't remember it. But that but-for test is a really fundamental aspect of the Australian approach to finding negligence or negligence through act or omission. And the basic premise is, in the Netherlands, the Dutch system does have its civil law in quite a tight code. In Australia, ours really has only developed through the courts, and there is, at the moment, a limitation. I'm not saying it's insurmountable, but we would have some, some substantial and significant difficulties if we were to just walk in exactly the same way. And I think Marianne's message is really, in looking at this approach, this is an approach. Work out how best to tailor that. And okay, yeah, you may not win, and you may lose on the first occasion. And bearing in mind the secondary difficulty for us is that as lawyers, as officers of the court, you can't just walk in going, oh, we're going to lose. You've got to try and find that you've got a reasonable prospect of succeeding in a case. So there's some really fertile ideas there in the way we approach. I mean, I don't think we've ever been to court and said, hey, how about just lapsing the but-for test? And what the merit of us trying to do that and how we would do that legally based on the fact that it's happened now in other jurisdictions. So we're already, thinking about how can we possibly. But yet they are two significant difficulties, and I could probably come up with a few more, but I won't. Absolutely. There is always ways of creating different. The laws made by the Parliament will always override the laws made by the courts. We know that because you get a great court outcome, and all of a sudden you've got a new parliamentary law that changes that outcome. Absolutely. If the Parliament legislated a way forward and changed our laws ever so slightly. We've done that with standing and things like that, where once upon a time you could only commence a case to protect the environment if you had some very special interest, and basically that meant some financial or proprietary interest. Now we've got lots of laws, because Parliament have made them, that says any person can commence this particular action in the court. So Parliament is certainly, and I think, that is one of the reasons why the works of EDOs around Australia have been very much focused on parliamentary law reform. But I think we're all at the same place that Agenda found themselves. It's not quick enough.
Well, I think that many things that were said were actually more or less the same. Like, we only have this notion of an unlawful deed, and what it is was only found out over the course of time by courts. So it's really defined case by case, and many things are the same. But I don't know whether what we invented is useful here, but in the Dutch system, it's if you do something and then you say it's unlawful, you have another body of knowledge around that, and if you don't do something and you ask a government to do something. So some of the things that were said only in the Netherlands are part of the if you do something doctrine, and the if you don't do something doctrine was only in the textbooks, and therefore we did many new things that we did things that are in the textbooks, but that were not really tried in court yet. And therefore, everybody said we would never win. So therefore, I would not be too pessimistic on forehand that it's not possible, because the basic notions are exactly the same. What this late line lady said was just nonsense, because we are not basing it on our constitutional law, because the constitutional law is just like the climate change law, one of the indirect things that are brought in to fill this open norm of duty of care. And we can't go straight to our constitution, and probably that's just the same as it is for you. So from what I'm hearing the past few days, there's many things the same. And therefore, I hope that people will read what we have been doing, because it was really not easy, but I think possible. And I don't know, of course, it depends very much on your judges. So if they are very conservative and they don't want to think, then it's more difficult. I think, we had a judge. We had two ladies and a chairman. And the chairman used to be the president of the court in The Hague, and he stepped down to become vice president because he wanted to do content and not management. And he was known to be very wise and very clever and very autonomous. And not necessarily on the left side. He did both things, so he was just being straight. And he just looked at the legal case and used a lot of cleverness, because I'm really impressed by what he's written down. So you have to find the right judge in the right time. And I think we were so lucky that we had him. And I hope that one day you will have him here too.
Another question from the floor.
That was, of course, a question that people were asking us too. Well, what if you lose? What if we lose? We have spent a lot of time the past 1.5 years to explain to all kinds of people that the climate change is urgency. And the Australian government, like the Dutch government, have signed the climate treaty. So they won't discuss with you whether there is climate change or whether the 2 degrees should be, etc. So there are many things that we agree upon, and you should just use all the positive things to bring them out in the open, and use the space you get when you have such a court case to tell people about the urgency of climate change. And then we would just have gone on. We could appeal and appeal again, so we could have gone for years. But you can use the time to discuss the topic. And I think over time, when climate change is going to appear more and more, you have the droughts and the fires and everything, I think 15 years ago we would not have won it. So I think if the cases go on, there will be more and more reasons to say yes. So we would have been going on for a couple of years if we would have lost. And in the Netherlands, if you lose, you pay, in this case, 13,000 euros, so that's affordable. Of course, in Australia, in some cases, it can be a lot more, so therefore it's sometimes difficult to go on. And then you need a supporters base that says, yes, this is so important for us, we all put in $10, and we want you to go on. Because you really need support of a lot of people, and I think both physical and financial to then go on. And in our system, it's more affordable.
Paul, can you find another questioner?
Can I stay seated? Or? Thanks. My question's about other litigations arising from this exciting finding. I thought it was really interesting that you cited the Belgian decision that's on foot and the prospective action that's about to be commenced in the Netherlands. I recently read an interview with your colleague Roger Cox, who identified that Urgenda is in contact with organisations in countries like Brazil and Ireland and England, and that was before the decision was handed down. So my question is, in light of this finding, that's such a landmark decision, which countries do you think will next see climate change litigation of this magnitude happen in?
So for the webcast people, the question is, there's a lot of other countries in Europe and also South America, such as Brazil, that are contemplating some sort of similar action to the Dutch case. And the question for Marianne is, where does she think the first cases might be following from her win?
Well, we have had very many people calling us, writing to us, Skyping, etc. So I think there are many lawyers around the world now looking into our case and looking for ways to do the same. We have already been speaking to quite a few of them, and one of my colleagues is going to New York in September because there's a group that wants to do something. So I think that there will be many cases following, and we have to see. I think 80% can be used. The last 20% you should look in your system whether it's possible and how it's possible. Like, we are an NGO, and in the Dutch system it's allowed as an NGO to come up for the better general good. So we were allowed to do this. This is not possible everywhere, so in other countries you might maybe have to do a class action and have a group of citizens that do this together. So it can be different in different countries, but I have the feeling that there's many people now that have hope and that want to go on and that didn't dare before, and that just now are taking the courage from our case, of which everybody said we would never make it, and have the courage to start it.
Jolie, would you like to pick a questioner from that side?
I tend to think that instead of litigation, probably education might be the way. Some time ago, when I had head getting caught by the car door, I studied economic development. And it was pretty much clear then that mining is not profitable or beneficial for the majority of the people. It's a capital intensive, not labour intensive. FIFOs didn't exist, which is another problem. Basically, I suppose, I don't know whether we can do it or whether some willing politician can do it and show that, well, I mean, in the last 50 years, mining has been good. In the last 15 years or so, where we had to export coal to East Asia, where they needed the energy, but now they're tapering off. Before that, mining went through pretty hard times.
Yeah, I agree with you that education is very, very important. I usually say to people who have this argument that we should certainly do it, but we don't have the time to wait for the people who are now young to be in a position of power and change the world, because we should do it within the next 15 to 20 years. So that is important. And I think the economic argument is highly important too. Because if you see that 40% of the power stations in America are now shut down in 5 years, you can see that the markets go down. And they go down in China, they go down everywhere. So we all very often use the economic argument because that's, for people in business, more convincing than environmental arguments. And I think both now go. And I think the third very important one is the moral argument. Like, we have now the Pope on our side, and in the Netherlands, the green churches are going to walk to Paris, and there's many, many different communities now coming up and saying, well, for the next and the future generation, we should really make the change. And it's also very much a moral question.
And if I could add to that, so the questioner raised the importance of education as being equally important as litigation, and mentioning mining issues. Tonight is an example of the education on climate change and mining. For example, Sean Ryan pointed out that in the Adani Carmichael case, the Queensland challenge to this proposed massive coal mine in the Galilee Basin, that case exposed that the mining company had been grossly exaggerating the economic benefits, both of jobs and royalties. So getting that message out that mining is not necessarily having those massive economic benefits that the mining company claims, that's a really important message and helps feed into the government policy debates. Another question, Jolie?
How about this side?
Where's the
Marianne, what I wanted to ask you, it follows on from what this lady was asking you, but it's a bit more specific. For the Dutch case, would it act as a precedent in other countries, the decision? Would it simply be persuasive or just a matter of interest? Because I'm wondering about, like dominoes falling in Europe, more and more of the countries that adopt what the Dutch have done, more likely
Well,
that it's going to be accepted through the rest of the world?
There are quite a few countries in Europe, like Germany, Denmark, England, and a number of others, that have already 30 up to 50% in place. So they don't have to do the minimum of 25% that the judge gave the Netherlands. But there were a number of parliamentarians in the EU Parliament that brought the topic up there, and they asked the commissioners, what will be will there be any reason to have different position in Paris based on this court case? And I haven't seen the answer yet, but you see that the discussion is going on, and I know that someone like Cristina Figueres, who is doing the climate change, is the delegate for the European Union, knows about our court case, and we were being followed in many countries. So I see that a few countries that are laggards, like the Netherlands, have been starting the procedures for a court case or already brought it to court, like the Belgians, and other countries wouldn't win because they already have much more in place. But the discussions are very useful, that really climate change is such a big problem that we should act. And that's, I think, one of the additional wins.
We have quite a few questions that have come through from Tasmania and other parts of Australia. One of them is from Felicity Holmes from EDO Tasmania, and she's raised that maybe we should take our government to court for not accepting science. How is And I thought I might ask Sean Ryan to comment on the role of science in litigation and policy. Up you get, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating the degree to which the governments have not been following hard science when it comes to the decision-making processes. And there are some parallels in the Dutch climate change case with the cases we've been running in Queensland. And one of them is that the science is now unequivocal, really. I mean, there's 95% certainty in human-induced climate change in the IPCC, and it's really quite convincing. And what a lot of people don't seem to necessarily appreciate from paying attention to the media is that the companies don't challenge the science of climate change in court. They just can't find anyone who can swear to the truth of, get in a witness box and argue against it. It's really unequivocal that there really is an urgent problem, and the court accepted that in the Dutch case, and very helpfully in that case, and I do commend you all to read it, it's quite a good case, it set out that science, and once you appreciate the science of climate change, it's then very hard to justify anything other than action. So it is a challenge to get our parliamentarians to accept that, because it's unlike the court, the truth doesn't seem to always carry as much sway in Parliament as it must in court. And that's what I think has been one of the strengths of using the legal system and the legal processes, actually having a system where you've got an impartial decision maker and the evidence has to be sworn to the truth of, really reveals these sort of things that can be obfuscated and hidden by use of the media and clever language by politicians. But a lot of that falls away when you get into court, and that happened in the Dutch decision, and I see it happening in the Queensland courts, and that's why I have great hope for our judiciary, as sort of Roger Cox outlined in the Revolution Justified, for them to take a role in sort of reflecting that truth back to society, as we have seen in cases like Mabo and the civil rights in America. So I don't hold necessarily a lot of hope in the short term for the politicians to be held to obey the science, but I do have faith in our legal system to, as Marianne was saying, to just make decisions on the facts and on the science, and I think that can help move us towards hopefully a more sustainable future. Thanks.
And we have had quite a lot of tweets and questions coming in from all different places. Roland has tweeted in, "Hope is a very valuable commodity in litigation," and also crowd pleading might replace crowdfunding as the thing to do. So thank you to everyone that sent in questions and comments. We probably can't get to all of them. So I think we have time for one more question. Paul, if you'd like to select a questioner, I can't really see everyone beyond the lights. Jolie has found a questioner.
I'm just curious about the extent to which the constitutional issue came up in the case, and whether, certainly not with our constitution, but with other constitutions across the world where there's a right to a clean environment, etc., whether that might be an angle which people can pursue in terms of taking on governments.
Well, I will answer the question.
Do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah, I will put the question in the answer. In our constitution, it said that the state should protect the environment and the people and so on, but it also says that a government has a very large discretionary power. So that was the reason why we couldn't go directly to the constitution, but the judge said indirectly to constitute this duty of care, I also look to the constitution that says a government should care for its citizens and the environment and so on. So indirectly you do use all these different things. But to go to court and say this is our perspective on the duty of care based on your basic law is very difficult, because there is usually a large discretionary power for the government. So therefore it's very interesting, I think, to read what we've been doing and why we translated it, because the way it's constructed is actually quite interesting and very clever, and an indirect way to get it all in, and you couldn't get it in directly. And I think in most states it will be difficult, but there are states where you can judge your law against your convention, and that's not even possible in the Netherlands. So in a certain way we are conservative too, and therefore it's kind of special that the judge did follow us. And for people who have many more questions, I had prepared a presentation which was much more legal. I might give it to you to put it on your website. So if you're really interested in many more legal details and don't want to read 100 pages, then you can skip to this other presentation. And if you have any more questions, you can ask them right after, or send me an email or Skype or whatsoever, because we really want to help everybody that wants to do something. And if you have any questions, whether you're a scholar or a lawyer, we will be happy to help you. Thank you.
So just to recap, we will put Marianne's presentation on the EDO Queensland website, or a link to it, whatever is best. If you haven't signed up for EDO Queensland electronic notification, please do. We will be having that important information about an EDO climate fund to pursue cases like this coming out very soon. I would like to thank everyone who's volunteered tonight to help create this event, and I'd also like to thank everyone so much for coming and showing some of the people power that's so important in terms of getting a better outcome for climate change. I'd like to thank Sue Higginson from EDO Sydney for coming up to share some information about their wonderful court cases, Sean Ryan, EDO Queensland Principal Solicitor. But above all, I'd really like to thank our inspiring special guest from the Netherlands, Marianne, for coming over to Australia, for being such an inspiring director of Ugenda, and for telling us about this wonderful success story. So please give her a very big round of applause. So that closes the evening's event, but if you're lucky, you might catch Marianne, Sean or Sue and be able to get in a question or two before we formally leave. Thank you.